Hi, this is Ed Rising, and welcome back to Ed's Pop O Matic Podcast, a retro pop culture podcast where everything retro beats anew when you keep it in your heart. And today we have another Beatles themed episode, and we're kind of doing something a little different than normal because, of course, the Beatles are retro. But we wanted to kind of shine a light on women writers, producers, podcasters, website makers, things of that nature, because they may not be as much credit given out in the world as they probably should be. So I'm going to go around and kind of introduce who our wonderful panel is tonight, and we have a lot of people, so this will take some time. Okay. Uh, so we're going to start off with Jude Sutherland KESSLER. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And Jude is the author of the John Lennon series of books. She's a historian on the Beatles side of things, and it's quite an extensive group of books on John's life from his early years going through right. I think she's in 66 now, right?
Right.
And so there are about 5 or 6 books on the subject already, and so and we have one that's coming out. So it's very interesting that she's able to draw so much of his life for all of us to get to know and maybe understand a little bit better. My next is and Jude, please say hello.
Hello, everyone.
So welcome to the nice people.
I cannot tell you, Ed, how much I have already learned from you asking me to be on the show because I've had to do a lot of thinking about it. We'll talk about it later, but already I have learned a lot from this experience. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Cool. And then we have Susan Ryan. Susan is a co-writer on the book of the four cities, the Beatles' four cities. Essentially does walking tours in New York on the areas that are Beatles related. She is a very much a big part of the Fest for Beatles fans as a coordinator for the panel rooms and things like that. And she's become a nice friend to me and all. Nice lady. Susan, say hello to everybody.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here tonight. Thank you for asking me to be part of this panel tonight, Ed. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be excellent.
Cool. We have Sarah Schmidt, who I also met at the Fest for Beatles fans. And Sarah has a website called Meet the Beatles for Real. And she's written a book called Dear Beatles People, which essentially is about the North American Beatles fan clubs and those relationships, and that's interesting. So we want to talk a little bit about that tonight. We have a returning guest for me from our to the podcast. She's joined us many times. Her name is JANICE MITCHELL, and JANICE is the author of her book My Ticket to Ride. I ran away to meet the Beatles from Cleveland and managed to get rock and roll band in Cleveland in the process. So it's a very intriguing story. I love the book. It's a great book. So that's something that's written in the same kind of line as fan club kind of activity. So hopefully we'll have a nice discussion in regards to that. Jan, can you say hello to everybody, please?
Nope, you're muted.
You're muted, Jan.
Jan,
you didn't test this earlier.
You're muted. You're muted.
Hold on. Ask to unmute. Yeah, hold on. I can do it here. Technical difficulties. Always technical difficulties. There we go. Is that on now? No. Ask
still
to
mute.
Unmute.
It's still muted.
Ask to unmute.
Jan needs to unmute. You asked her to unmute. She needs to do the unmute.
Yeah, she needs to.
Jan, you're muted. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
There you go. Now we
there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Now I can hear you. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Ed, thank you for having me on. You know, I adore you. And I'm so happy to be on the Pop O Matic, a name I love, with ladies that I have not seen in quite a while, but I'm very happy to be a part of this little group tonight. Thank you.
Cool. And lastly, we have a woman that we all call the Queen. And she's an educator. She's a writer. She's written a book called the Songs That We Were Singing, Hidden the Beatles, Hidden Tracks, or Lost Tracks. What is it called? What was it called, kid?
It's Guided Tours of the Beatles, lesser known tracks. I know,
There
it's a
you go.
mouthful. It's a mouthful.
She's got it. And she's the co-host of podcasts, Talk More Talk, and a solo Beatles video cast, and also Poppermost, the very friendly and my good friend, the Queen, Dr. Kid O'Toole. Kid, how are you?
I am doing great, Ed. Thank you so much. And Ed has taken many of my classes, as has Susan. So the two star students, and I'm just so thrilled to be here tonight with this distinguished panel. I've just been so looking forward to this.
Great. So this idea for this podcast came about essentially because I saw a post on Kit's Facebook page, and she was posting a article in the what was it called? It was called The Legend, the Independent Premium, by Louise Thomas. I believe it's Louise Thomas. They didn't see an actual name on it, but she appears to be the editor of the Independent Premium, and she was bringing about the fact that with all the new upcoming movies that are being made on the Beatles, the independent lives, as far as a lot of the books that have been out, it all seems to be very much male dominated. And why aren't there more women writing books, or at least recognized for writing books? And she apparently didn't do as much research as she could have, because there are quite a few women that are writing books and are very much involved in this process. And but it's a good idea to bring attention to it, and that's what we'd like to try to do tonight, and talk about it some more, see why these things are happening, and to let the world know as to what all of you are doing, and how we can move this forward a bit. So I'm going to ask Jude, if you could start and talk a little bit about why it is that you wanted to write about John Lennon, and what those books are.
Well, the books are written as you would read a narrative, or dare I say the taboo word, a novel, but they are not historical fiction, because I've spent the last 3.5 months researching January of 1966. So before I ever put pen to paper, I just research and research and research and research and dig and dig and dig and dig. And what the Beatles are wearing, they wore. What John says, or George says, or Paul says, or Ringo says, they said. It's all footnoted with direct quote by John Lennon, direct quote by Ringo Starr. Now, did they walk to the window? Yeah, I don't know about that. Did they clear their throat? I don't know. But all the things that they did and they said and they ate and they wore are all documented and footnoted in over 4,000 footnotes in the book. But it reads like a narrative. Because of that, Ed, I have had, and because when I started out, all I knew that I wanted to do was be Susan Ryan.
Don't we all?
Don't you say that, Jude? I just go, oh my goodness.
I saw Susan on the stage at the Fest for Beatles Fans. I want to say it was 2005 or 2004, or something like that. And I said, oh, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be Susan Ryan. I did not know, and I should have, because this is Susan's field of expertise. I did not know that fan fiction existed, and she had a website at that time that was very, very active, a fan fiction website, Rooftop Sessions. But I didn't know that, and so I did not know there would be any problem with writing a book as a narrative. once the book was released and I heard the word fan fiction and people started writing, I just discovered last night another website that's fairly current that says, don't read this book. It's just junk. It's just historical fiction.
Oh,
Because of
ouch.
that, I have had to be so careful not to put any of me in it, not to
Mhm.
put anything but the facts,
Yeah.
and to be very straight and narrow. And that is why, and you taught me this, Ed, I never would have known this without preparing. I'm a little emotional about it. I never would have known this without preparing for this tonight, but I don't identify as a female writer. And I think in 2025, it's okay. I think it's
Yeah.
okay.
Mhm.
When I was a little girl, I was Peter Pan, not Wendy. I was Zorro. And when Candy Leonard interviewed me for her book, Beatleness, she was asking me about my experience. And I said, oh, yeah, once I saw the Beatles, I knew I wanted to be John Lennon. And she said, whoa, what? Wait, what did you just say? And I said, I wanted to be John Lennon. I wanted to be the mover and the shaker. I wanted to be the hero out there in the middle of the action.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be the girl fan on the side or Cynthia. And so I have never identified as a female writer. I identify as a writer.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay, so I think that's a really good point that you make, Jude, and that's kind of the point of this whole thing, as to does it just because you're a woman that's writing something, does it have to necessarily be from a woman's perspective? Can a woman be able to write as regardless to what her gender might be? And if anybody wants to pop in on these questions, please feel free to do so.
I would like to say that has been an issue. It's unfortunate that it's an issue, but I know that the other women, my esteemed colleagues in this discussion, will say that it doesn't happen as often now as it used to, but it does happen that sometimes you're the only woman on a panel, or sometimes you're the only woman cited as being an expert, or you're the only woman cited as being a writer of books about the Beatles that mean anything. And there is still this glass ceiling that we're still trying to break through, because there's been a certain amount of mentrification of the fandom, and there've been articles written about it, and it's unfortunate. So when I hear Jude saying, that she told Candy that she wanted to be the mover and the shaker, she wanted to be John, I get that, because when I was a kid, okay, I mean, I was a little young to be a first generation Beatles fan by a technicality, but like when my friends and I played make believe, I wanted to be Batman. I didn't want to be Batgirl. I wanted to be Batman. This was, and so I get it. I understand that. And I think it's still rather unfortunate that there is a certain faction of the fandom that dismisses anything that women do in this fandom that is scholarly in any way as something unworthy of discussion, or unworthy of debate, or unworthy of even mentioning. And even when it is mentioned, it's always mentioned with a but attached to it. She's a woman writer, but she wrote about women in the fandom, but she wrote about how come girls screamed, which isn't necessarily the truth. So it's a fight we've all had to fight for years. And I see Kit nodding, I see Sarah nodding, I see Jude nodding, I see Jan nodding. All of us are nodding here because we've all heard it.
Yeah.
Said to our faces, which is maddening, because we know, and there are, by the way, plenty of male writers and scholars who don't disrespect our knowledge at all.
right.
But to convince the rest of the fandom is sometimes very hard.
Yeah.
Well, let's just move on over to Jan Mitchell for a minute, because in your book, Jan, you gave a outline of Beatlemania 1963-64, and it wasn't just a matter of writing about the hysteria of it. You wrote essentially about how it made you feel, what you were engaged with, what was all going around, the whole atmosphere of the whole thing. You really painted a very, very good picture of the whole situation. So why wouldn't more women be given credit to being doing something like that? And I think you did. I think you did great with it, and you shined a light on something that was really very important. At least I think so, anyway.
Well,
Um,
I think I had a very unique experience, and I just wrote about it as it happened. There were a lot of reasons why I left and decided to, with my friend, to go to England, and we wanted to live where the Beatles came from, to breathe Beatle air, and get a whole new way of life, which we couldn't have here in Cleveland, which was very restrictive. I mean, I grew up Catholic, with nuns and Irish relatives, and there were always lots of silent rules that were imposed upon you. And then I had a personal tragedy where my great uncle died, and that impacted me very strongly, very strongly. And
so the Beatles, in a sense, represented a great freedom for you to move away from all this negativity and this restriction in your life. And that's something that I think a lot of us feel about the Beatles music and their personas as well, is that it found something inside you and you were able to find something, maybe courage out of them to do something for yourself.
well, I was
Am I being too much of a psychotherapist here?
Well, I was always very independent as a child because I grew up in an unfortunate situation. So I learned to be a survivor very early on. I never really had a childhood. So at this point, when the Beatles came along and I heard "I Want to Hold Your Hand" for the very first time, the day after Christmas, 1963, when it first popped on the radio, it just affected me greatly. It just overwhelmed me, filled me with such great happiness that I had never known. And that really moved me to think, well, there must be a better life somewhere. And through the whole summer, my friend and I, we made it happen. We got our passports and our one-way TWA tickets to England without telling anybody at all. And the day after the Beatles concert here in Cleveland, September 15th, 1964, the next morning, instead of going to school, we were on a plane. Okay. So we were living the life. I mean, and of course, that time period was really a time period of freedom that we don't have today. Like today, I couldn't have gotten away with that because couldn't have gotten out of the airport, because
No,
everybody's communicating constantly. Like there's no room to breathe anymore, or to think, or to really feel free, because we're so inundated with social media and having to be in contact with people all the time. So I feel very fortunate that I was the right age at the right time when our culture was about to explode due to Beatles music, which has carried us forward. I was there, the first generation. When I got over to London, we experienced the music that was actually the development of the British invasion. Like the Rolling Stones had been the house band like a week before we got there at one club. The Kinks were there, they were now the house band. So we experienced everything of that era, like firsthand, and we were living it and loving it. And there was no way to feel anything except, had nothing to do with us being girls. I never felt like, oh, I'm a girl doing something really weird. I just was myself doing what I wanted to do.
Exactly.
And that's what has really carried me through my whole career as a journalist, as an investigator, because I'll just kind of take a little sidestep into my investigation career, where I found myself as the only woman among a bunch of guys, like retired NYPD detectives, all doing investigations, and how they wanted to treat me was not acceptable. They just wanted to take advantage of my good work. Like they would go into my office and steal my notebooks with my leads in there, and they would go and follow up on them. They
Yeah,
put me in
yeah.
very dangerous situations because I was a female, you know, and they felt they could take advantage of me. But I had a big surprise for them because I made the decision, I am going to cut myself away from the herd, solve my cases, and not look back. And that's pretty much my attitude in life. Like, I remain independent. I don't think of myself as a woman. I think of myself as a person who is goal driven, and that's my main focus.
And that's really great because you're using your own strength. You're not letting your whatever society's vision of what a woman should be to block you from moving forward, to write about your experience, to put it in a book form so that everybody could enjoy and relate to and so forth. And of course, everything else that you're doing with your life. And the same with Jude, you know, you're coming through and you're putting these narratives together, and you know, it's fascinating, and I need to get to know more of your books more distinctly, more directly than I know. I know of the books. I know that they're very big books.
As one
um,
person said on a website last night when she found out that someone said it's historical fiction, she said, "Do you mean I have purchased a very expensive and very heavy paperweight?"
But one other thing you've done, Jude, is that particularly at the Festival of Beatles fans, and I'm sure it's not the only venue that you're doing these, but you're giving these discussions on John's life and giving us a better understanding as to what kind of person he was. For instance, there was that one panel about John Lennon, sinner or saint.
That was
Blew me away, and Sarah was part of that, and Kit was part of that.
Yeah. And it was Jude's idea, and we ran with it. And boy, that panel had a full house. And we weren't all women up there, by the way. Scott McKinley was part of it as well.
Right.
But and he is an expert and he knows what he's talking about. And he's, you know, we're not at the point where we have to exclude men from what we do.
Of course not.
It doesn't happen. But
that's not the point.
No, it's not the point.
Right.
The point is that we're as knowledgeable as any guy. And, you know, it's like Jude talked about the fan fiction website that I used to run. And here's where I run into a problem, okay? I'm very proud of what I did with Rooftop Sessions. I treated, because people were writing fan fiction about any topic under the sun, okay? So I figured, and I wrote Beatles, I guess you call it Beatles fan fiction, back when I was 16 years old in the mid 70s. Okay. So this is, you know, I didn't know other people did this. This was, you know, and when I started that website, it was because somebody pointed out to me that if I treated it like literature and published stuff that was really good and that was literary, it would get some respect.
Right.
I was 20 years ahead of my time. I'm not going to lie about that. Okay. I am very proud of what I did with that website. It went fallow around 2006, 2007 for a variety of reasons. My father died. I couldn't keep up with it every month, and I was getting no new submissions. It was nothing new under the sun. And part of the problem I had with it was that I had what started out as one page of submission guidelines that I wanted people to adhere to, gradually became 5 pages of don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. It was really negative, and it was just kind of, there was no point. But okay, that aside, what I did with that, I'm very proud of. I published a lot of highly literary work by very, very, very good writers. Kit did a whole article on it in Beatle Fan, and she had to literally grovel at Bill King's feet to make him understand that this wasn't baloney. Okay. And meanwhile, in the last few years, there've been several books that came out. There was a book that was edited by 2 friends of mine, Michael Ventrella and Randy Dawn, called Across the Universe. And it was speculative fiction. I don't call it science fiction anymore, speculative fiction. So science fiction, fantasy, that kind of thing, with the Beatles as characters. Okay.
Yes, I'm familiar with the book.
And they edited that book. And I went to them and I said, but I did this 20 years ago, and everybody laughed at me.
Yeah.
Well, maybe the time has come. And here I was, boy, was I ahead of my time. Okay. I'm proud of what I did with that. There is a flip side to that. the flip side to that is that now that I have moved on from this website that went fallow almost 20 years ago, and is still findable on the Wayback Machine, by the way. If you go into the internet Wayback Machine, you'll find it. Okay. And I'm not, but the website itself went fallow and I let the domain lapse and the whole thing, is that I've moved on to other stuff. Okay. I program the discussion rooms at the Fest. I moderate the discussions, half of the discussions in that room, along with Wally Podrazik. And I do a lot of work on that. And I've also I'm a tour guide. I co-wrote that book with Richard Porter and David Bedford. I've moved on to other stuff. And yet there is a certain faction that still is, she's the crazy fan fiction lady. Okay. And I cannot get rid of and mind you, it's not flattering. It's the crazy fan fiction lady. Okay.
Yeah.
It's never flattering. It's never, you did a great job presenting this as literature. Never. It's always, you're out of your mind still. And first of all, I never thought I was out of my mind. And secondly, I am not out of my mind. So that's a whole other thing. So there's this idea, and this is why Jude, when she says, like, somebody says, do you mean to tell me I bought a really expensive paperweight? Her book never has been presented as fiction, has never been explained to be fiction. I never thought it was fiction in a million years. I know that the footnotes take up almost as much room as the book. I mean, this is, heavily researched, heavily documented, heavily footnoted and, endnoted and parsed into where she got the information. And there's always going to be a faction that is like, you're a girl and you wrote about how much they screamed because you're a girl. Okay. First of all, I hate to tell you that at 63 years old, I'm not a girl, but aside from that, I haven't been a girl in a long, long time. But aside from that, okay, there's this idea that nothing we do is serious. And Jan wrote about her experience, but she wrote it without any boundaries on it. This is what I did. I didn't care that I was female. I went ahead and did it. Jude, footnotes and researches. Sarah wrote 2 books, one about the Beatles in St. Louis and another book about the US fan clubs. And they're both like, well, the St. Louis book isn't quite, but the fan club book is this thick and the St. Louis book is this thick. And she researched it and footnoted it and went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame library to research it and busted her buns to get the facts right. Okay. And Kit teaches classes on the Beatles. Kit wrote several books on the Beatles. She is on 2 podcasts. She knows her stuff. She gets up at Fest, and yet, there is still this group of people who are like, you're girls and you screamed. Mm-hmm. And the impetus for this whole discussion was that somebody wrote an article about Christine Feldman Barrett's marvelous book, A Women's History of the Beatles, which is published by Bloomsbury, an academic publisher, okay, and is suitable to be used as a textbook in a pop culture class, okay? And they basically pretty much disrespected every woman Beatles expert. The article was written in the Independent by a woman. Mm-hmm. And it was disrespected every woman Beatles expert on the planet, including Christine.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very interesting. You should bring that up, speak about it in that way, because the point is, okay, maybe at 12 years old or whatever it was, 14 years old, women and men to some degree screamed at the Beatles. Of course. It's part of being a fan, which we're going to get to with Kit in a few minutes.
My book talks all about the girls screaming. I did write a book about how the girls screamed.
Yes.
I'm proud of that.
Because look, that's part of the story.
It's part of the I mean,
you also researched it in huge depth, and it went so much further than the girls screamed.
Yeah. Yes. And that's just the whole idea is that you've all written as young adults, as older adults, and in general, but not the attitude should not be because, well, they were at 13 years old, they screamed at the Beatles.
No.
I mean, I write about things that I like, and I do podcasts about things about that I like, not just because I screamed at the artist or whatever it was. It's because I've read up on it. I've done some information. I have a passion for that music, or I have a passion for that particular thing, and that's what each of you were doing. And it should be very much equal, I suppose, in the view of how people look at the work.
Well,
yeah.
I
I'm
tell
sorry,
people
Sarah.
all the time, and I think that I'm going to shut up in a minute. But my fellow panelists will agree with this one. I tell people all the time, okay, if I told you that I didn't like looking at the Beatles, I'd be lying.
Yeah.
Okay. I like looking at them. I know two of them are not on this earth anymore. I know they don't look like that anymore. I know that when I became a huge fan in the mid-70s, they were in their 30s and they didn't look like they did in 1964. I kind of get that. I'm not that dense, okay? But if I told you that I didn't like looking at them, I'd be lying to you. But if I told you that there was so much more to it than that, I'm not lying to you.
Well, that's passionate. That's passionate about something. Marilyn Monroe, for God's sakes. Right? How many people have been idolizing Marilyn Monroe 40, 50 years later after she died? I mean, or whatever. You can. There are many, similar type of things.
Absolutely.
And I want to let you know, Susan, that I met you through kids classes.
Yeah.
But then at the Fest for Beatles Fans, and I saw this woman organize all of these events.
Thank you.
All these panels and moderate and so forth. I'm saying, geez, I want to be like Sarah. Susan, because she's
too,
organized,
and Sarah.
And I want to be like Sarah. I'd like to talk to you, Sarah. If you could come in and talk to us a little bit about your books that you've written, particularly the one about the fan clubs.
Yeah.
Dear Beatles people, and why it is that you wanted to write about that angle of fanfic, of fandom.
Well, I started the Meet the Beatles for Real blog in 2009, and I always felt like the pictures taken by the fans and the stories that go along with the Beatles meeting the fans and the fans interacting with the Beatles told a more complete story than just the professional photographs and the Beatles side of the story. So the fan side of the story always really interests me, and that's how I started Meet the Beatles for Real. So through that, I kept getting more information about the fan club, particularly the one in America. And I wanted to know more about it, and there just wasn't anything written about it. So I decided I was going to write a little book, which did not end up being a little book at all. 7 years of very hard research and interviewing people and digging through old newspapers, and it was a lot of work. It was it was fun. I enjoyed it. And that's what the interest is. What really on this topic of females that I find fascinating is that in those early years, 1964 to 1972, the years of the book, it was the females that were telling the Beatles story. They wrote those newsletters every week, every month, that told the news of the Beatles. They were researching and vetting information, and they were the ones doing it all. They were telling the story. Yep. And what I'm right now trying to research and find out is, when did that change? When did the men start telling the story and the women start taking the back seat? Like, when exactly did that switch happen? Because we know it happened, because that's what we're talking about today, is how the majority of Beatle writers are men. So when did the women take that step back? So that's kind of what I've been researching lately.
Okay. And we talk about these upcoming movies, and you think about, maybe somebody would have said, okay, well, we're going to have two male writers why don't we bring in a woman to to at least to collaborate and make it a collaboration amongst 3 or 4, 6 writers, and 2 or 3 of them being women, 2 or 3 of them being men. So this way, it gives a broader picture of people's relationship with the Beatles. I mean, I don't know if that really is necessary or not, but I do think that we have to look at it and saying everybody should have the right to be able to have their work respected. We're all passionate, we're all writers, and we all do these projects. One should be supposedly greater because one is a male and one is a female. So I want to bring in
any of our books, well, maybe except for Jan, because it's about her own experience, but could have been written by a man or a woman. You know, like
but the fact that she was able to write
a book about the fan club, they just didn't. I did it, but you know, a man could have written a book like Kids, where she did a deep dive into,
of course.
Of course.
You know, it's not like it was a woman's topic. It was,
but here we have a case where Jan had a particular experience and used it at some point in her life, decided that this was the time for me to write about this experience, and she didn't just say, okay, well, you know, maybe I'll just shove it off, or maybe somebody at some publishing house mentioned it to her. I don't know. What was the impetus of actually writing the book, Jan?
Oh, me? Oh, okay.
What was the impetus of writing it? Who suggested writing it?
Never thought about writing a book. It was a funny, I don't want to take up too much time, but when I was at that age and I ran away on my adventure and I came back, everybody was down on me. I was told I was not allowed to talk about it by family, the court. I became a juvenile delinquent because of it. And I don't think that if boys had run away like we did, they would not have been dragged through the mud as we were, because we were girls, right?
Yep. Yeah. Okay.
And girls don't act like that. No, So we were outside the box and severely punished. I was severely punished. I was told at school, if anybody tries to talk to me about what I did, I was to take their names and report them to the principal, which no, I'm not going to be doing that. At home, I was only permitted to go out after school to walk the dog, and it became very, very oppressive. And I was told, you know, the damage that I had done by what I did, the humiliation, the embarrassment that I brought to the whole community, right? So basically, I just shut down about talking about it because and I just
What brought it back? What brought it back in recent years?
Well, I'm getting that. I was here in Cleveland, and on the radio, I heard Paul McCartney singing Blackbird because he was getting ready to do a one-on-one concert in Cleveland. And as I was hearing him sing, suddenly I was flooded yet again, the same way I was when I first heard I Want to Hold Your Hand, flooded with emotion. And I practically just jumped up and said, oh my God, I can talk about what I did. You know, the curse is lifted, and that's what I'm going to do. So I talked to a friend of mine who lives in my building. He's involved in the entertainment world. He knows the Live Nation people. And I was thinking, well, maybe I could get a free ticket or something to the concert. That's all I was thinking about. So I said to my neighbor, well, I said, you know, I have a story I'd like to share with you. So he said, great, let's sit down, have some wine, and we'll talk about it. So I told him about my whole story, and he said, oh my God. He said, that's like incredible. He said, what you have to do now is you have to write a letter to Live Nation, and we're going to send it to them. He said, go ahead, write your letter. So I said, okay. Then he said, let's make this into an exclusive press release. I'm like, now I'm in a whole different world that I know nothing about. So then I said, well, let me just copy some headlines from the newspaper stories about the, the whole trip.
The incident, yeah.
The incident. And that'll make them know this is a true story. So then he said, okay, everything's ready. Here's the phone number for the Live Nation contact, because he knew him really well. He said, I want you to call this number, and when he answers the phone, you're to just say this: I have an exclusive for you. Can I have your email address? And he said, to my great astonishment, okay, and he gave me his email. And I said, oh my God, you know, when you know people, they all
Yeah.
know what the code words are and everything. So I emailed it to him. So my friend said, well, we'll give it 30 days. And if he doesn't respond, then the exclusive is off and we can pursue other venues. The
Okay.
next day, I get an email from the pop music writer for the Cleveland Plain Dealer. The Live Nation guy had forwarded my email to him and said, you might want to interview her. This sounds interesting. So that's how it got started. He interviewed me. My story was going to appear in the Sunday newspaper before Paul McCartney's one-on-one. So this guy said, I want to interview you because McCartney doesn't do, you know, individual interviews anymore. So you're next. I said, I'm next. Okay, you got it. I mean, I'm just shocked all the time. So he and his camera guy came over. We went upstairs to our penthouse here, did the interview. He wrote the story, and they did a 3-part release on Cleveland.com. So somebody that he knew about my story and said, I want to talk to Jan because he was a Beatle historian and a merchandiser in Canada. So we had like a 3-hour conversation, and he said, Jan, that's got to be the greatest story I ever heard. He said, now you know what to do. And I said, well, what am I supposed to do? And he says, he was flabbergasted. He said, don't you know you have a book to write now? And I said, I do. And he said, yeah, get on it. And I said, okay. So
isn't that a great feeling? Somebody actually listens to you, puts something together and says, hey, they were as enthusiastic about it as anybody. And they're telling you that you got to write that book. And that must have really helped you.
I just got started.
Wow.
And I didn't know how to write. I never wrote a book before. I mean, newspaper stories, interviews, investigative reports that I could do, but a whole book.
Wow.
I joined a
the
group.
Learning curve.
Yeah, big learning curve. I joined a group here in the Cleveland area called Publish, Polish, Sell Your Book. And I said, okay. I go to the group. For some reason, I take the newspaper article with me. It was 3/4 of a page in the Sunday newspaper, right? With pictures from when we were interviewed we had a press conference in London before we came back here. I stand in the middle of the group. I hold up the newspaper. I can't even believe I'm doing this. And I said, I'm making a commitment to everybody here in the group that I am going to write a book about this. And I sat down and I said, oh my God, what have I done? But I made the commitment and I felt I had to honor that. So that kind of pushed me. And then another person who wrote a book, a woman named Ann Moses, who
we know Ann.
Yeah.
She's been on the podcast a couple of times.
She's incredible. She encouraged me. She said, I love your story. She said, it's gold. And
Moses, for most of my audience that does not remember, was the former editor of Tiger Beat magazine.
That's
back
right.
in the 60s and early 70s.
And she's got a book too, talking about all that. And so she said, I want to introduce you to my editor because you're going to need an editor. So I said, okay, I am. Whatever anybody who seemed like they knew what they were doing said, I said, well, that must be pretty good advice. So one of the guys in our group, I said, so how do you write a book? He said, oh, it's simple. You start at the beginning, you keep writing through the middle until you get to the end. I said, okay.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And so essentially, you know, you were able to put this together. You got that encouragement. You put it together. It was essentially all you. You got some help from the various professionals, and you got your message out there.
And my book is completely evidence-based because of all the newspaper articles, you know, that documented everything through the whole trip and the return.
Yeah, I totally recommend it. It's called Ticket to Ride by Janice Mitchell. How I ran away to meet the Beatles and got rock and roll band in Cleveland.
Let me make a slight correction.
Please.
My Ticket to Ride, How I Ran Away to England to Meet the Beatles and got rock and roll band in Cleveland, a true story from 1964. That's a
Fantastic.
long title, easy to remember.
That's fantastic. So I want to get to the next part of this podcast, in which I want to talk a bit more about fandom in general and how that relates to women as opposed to men, perhaps, if that needs to be a distinction. So on this area, I'm going to ask Kit, Sarah, to kind of talk a little bit about their experiences as fans, coming in. I mean, all of us are fans at different times in our lives, so we should all pop in and say what we want to do. But Kit hasn't had a chance to talk yet, and Sarah should expound a bit more about what she's been doing. So, Kit, can you take it away a little bit and talk us through a little bit about the book that you and Ken Womack co-edited called Beatles and Fandom, please?
Absolutely. Yeah, this was a really fascinating book to work on because fan studies are kind of relatively new area in academia. And it really, we felt that this was Beatles fandom was something that needed to, be studied from all different angles. And we had contributions from all different scholars, but I contributed a chapter talking about the impact of technology on fandom. I mean, social media, Zoom and podcasts, videocasts have really changed fandom in many ways. I mean, we're able to communicate with each other. I mean, in the past, you would go to Beatle Fest, a couple of times a year, and you meet your friends there, and that was great. But that was it. And then, unless you lived close to them, you wouldn't see them again until the next year. Well, now it's a completely different story. And I think in many ways, I mean, as we all know, social media has its downsides for obviously. But I was able to really make a career out of my fandom, which I did not expect at all. I mean, I started writing for Beatle Fan magazine in the mid 90s. So, I mean, I've been doing this for a while, but when podcasting came along, video casting, that really changed things for me, and I'm sure a lot of people sitting here can testify that it really helps you to get the word out about your work, and connect with other fans, interview experts, and it was something that obviously in the 70s, 80s, and 90s didn't exist. And so it's really fascinating to see, just how big a role technology played. I mean, as when Susan was talking about fan fiction, I mean, before that, fan fiction was, people just sort of traded it amongst themselves, maybe had a Xerox newsletter, and Sarah can say more about this in a second, but the fan club newsletters were just, photocopied and sent out. Now, it's a completely different story. So, and the book covers other areas of fandom too, from, tourism, to gender, to the perspective of someone who actually performs in a Beatles tribute band. And which was a fascinating article, because it's kind of like, you want to put yourself as a musician, you want to put a little bit of your own style into a performance, but you can't exactly do that, because you're a tribute band. You're supposed to do what the Beatles did. You're trying to replicate that. And so the kind of, struggle that a musician has with that. So it really was a fun book to do, and a fascinating one, because they're just, fan culture is just, and fan studies, there are just so many directions.
Yeah.
Now
Now, I have a friend of mine who's a musician. He's my friend's my best friend's brother. He is in a band called Liverpool Shuffle. His name is Joe Rafano. He's been on our podcast. He was interviewed here a while back, and he talks to me about the fact that they have to be very structured as far as putting that music out as it was written, as it was recorded, and to resist the want to put your own little spin on it.
Yeah.
One of the things about what am I talking about? Talking about fandom.
Yeah.
One of the things about fandom that I find it's what's so wonderful about today is all the interaction. Of course, we see it on Facebook, we see it with the podcasts, this and that. Now, Sarah, I want to ask you about how that was back in the day from the fan clubs that you researched. Were you finding, I would imagine, a lot of pen pal kind of things were going on?
Definitely. Lots of pen pals and long distance phone calls that they had to pay big money to talk to their Beatle friends. But if you got a scoop that Paul is in their town, then they got on the phone and paid that big money, and mom and dad had to deal with it later. You know, scoop that, oh my gosh, John and Paul are in town. But there was a lot of pen pals. One of the things that nobody seems to realize is that the very first Beatles convention was held in 1968 in Minneapolis. And it was by a bunch of girls who got together from different independent fan clubs. They all decided to come together and have the very first Beatles convention. So, and they had a great time. I was just reading a letter, that I somehow got a hold of. I don't know how I get a hold of all this weird stuff, but I do. I have all these papers. I was just reading a letter that one wrote to another who didn't get to come, explaining everything they did. And I thought, well, I wish I was there. That sounds like a good time. They did a lot of the same things we do today. But one thing they did, they had a big banquet where everybody dressed up, and then they acted out skits that was supposedly the most hilarious thing ever. And so-and-so and so-and-so were John and Yoko. And it was so funny. I was like, oh, I wish I was
creativity.
I need to know. I mean, I can just imagine that it was pretty funny.
We need to suggest a big banquet to Mark.
Yes.
Yeah, but
He'll say no.
He talked about how they all were just slumming around in their old t-shirts, and then everyone got dressed up and everyone looked like it was a whole different crew.
Wow. That's so cool.
That sounds like fun.
I was just thinking it's just another example, and it's just that technology has changed things over time. But the one thing that I think is very common with a lot of Beatles fans is we're not content to just sit and listen to the music and watch. We need to create something.
Yeah.
We want to interact with it in some way and help shape the story, shape their story. And so, so from 68, these fans were doing that. And today, whether, we've written a book or you're putting together a podcast or you're an artist, I mean, it's amazing how this fandom in particular really has become this very interactive kind of community where we're creating things.
And that's something I want to bring up because one of the guests that we had planned to be here today cannot make the podcast, but her name is Skylar Modi. And Skylar is well known throughout TikTok and Facebook and other social media platforms for creating these wonderful videos in which she's celebrating a new album release or a top 5 of this or being John Lennon, dressing up in character. So talking about Jude saying years ago, I wanted to be John Lennon. Skylar is doing something along those lines in these wonderful videos that she shares with everybody, and she knows I'm going to talk about her. So
Skylar is a force of nature. Okay, and what Kit was saying about we are creative people, the way that I met Skylar was one of her videos, one of her TikToks was about if you are a Beatles fan, you are inherently a creative person.
Yeah.
And it resonated with me so strongly that I sent her a note and I was like, where do you live? Do you live near New York City? Because I'd love to get together with you. She's like, I'm in Bergen County, New Jersey. So I I said to her, girl, you're crossing the bridge, we're having lunch.
Mhm.
I've known her ever since. She
yeah, so
is,
she's very interesting as to what she does.
yeah, and
And
she has a
I
classic
think she
nature in
should
the
go in
fandom.
acting, but that's
Yeah.
she does what she wants to do, and
She's
it's
absolutely, she's a complete force of nature in the fandom. She um presents her ideas in these ways that are hard to resist and that resonate in some way with large segments of the fandom. And I've said this, I don't know if my fellow panelists here will agree with this, but I think they probably will, that I used to say all the time that if you're a casual Beatles fan, okay, if you're the kind of Beatles fan who's like, oh yeah, I've heard that album or whatever, that's fine. And it's great to carry that torch, and it's great to have the fandom perpetuated that way. And it's nice to see somebody who's 26 years old, like Skylar, she's the same age as my son, she's a little bit younger than him, that she's passing the torch, and without the next generation of fans, there won't be a perpetuation of the fandom. So we need the younger fans to be, but if you're a casual Beatles fan, it's like, oh yeah, I've heard the song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds will be, that's one thing. If you're the kind of person, because you're not a fan yet, right? If you're the kind of person where this literally grabs you viscerally, and it strikes some chord with you that you become this kind of a fan, like we are.
Yeah.
The person who goes to the fest every year, or the person who creates content like Skylar, or the person who wants to be part of a festival like those girls in 1968, that they wanted to have a fan convention and get together with their friends from far and wide, and they did it. That's a whole different ballgame. When you are this kind of a fan, you're not just perpetuating the fandom, you are living the fandom.
That's a great way to describe it.
Absolutely, you are living this fandom. It is literally my life. And when it collides with other parts of my life, I mean, I can tell you, I won't go into them, but I could tell you all kinds of weird stories where other parts of my life that are completely not Beatles related, and I run into Beatles people who know me from Beatles circles and go, what are you doing here? And I'm like, the same thing you're doing here, and it's not about the Beatles. So it's, when those worlds collide, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
And I think
And
everyone here,
and Skylar will be a guest on the podcast in the future, and perhaps we can all do another version of this at a later date, because there is so much more to discuss.
Don't forget Caitlin Larkin.
Yes.
Yes.
SXM, who is in that same young group and is a force of nature as Susan.
Yes.
For the Beatles. Also, someone that not everyone may know is Rachel Bartlett, who has a Beatles, I think it's called Beatles Banter radio show out of Connecticut. And
cool.
I think Rachel is in her early 30s.
Mm-hmm.
There are many people who are out there who are ready to take that torch and run with it. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
And we are so grateful to them for doing that. And,
Caitlin got her job through a social media campaign.
Yeah.
I didn't know that she does, and she still does, like the traffic reports on a local radio station in Orlando. But like, she put together a whole social media campaign about, I want to be on the Beatles channel. And lo and behold, she got the job, and not only did she do an hour every weekday, but she's become sort of the permanent guest host when she's subbing for something like Meg Griffin, radio legend. Those of us who live in New York know Meg for a long time.
Right.
Knows who I'm talking about. But when she's subbing for somebody on a regular basis, somebody like Meg, that means she's made it. Okay. And so, yes, I don't know this Rachel Bartlett. I'm going to have to go looking for her, Jude, because I am interested. But I think that when we see the younger generation passing on the torch, and that's male or female, okay, I think that, to me, is a sign that this will go on. And I see it in other fandoms, by the way. Okay, I see it in other fandoms for sure. Like when people and when people say, "Oh, Taylor Swift." Well, you know what? My daughter-in-law's a Swiftie, and her fans are as passionate as Beatles fans are, and Paul McCartney thinks she's the real deal, and I have no doubt that in 50 or 60 years, people will still be listening to Taylor Swift and will still be passionate about her music. And I think
cool.
there's room in the world for this fandom to perpetuate, for new fandoms to come up and have people be just as passionate, and for new fandoms and so you can't dismiss, because there was a time when people dismissed Beatles fans as the lunatics, right?
Oh, sure. There was Sinatra or Elvis or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
whoever it was.
And
There's always
that's
a segment of the
why,
population that's going to do that.
exactly. That's why I say that Swifties are probably the next generation of fandom that will last.
Well, that's cool.
Because she has the talent, she has the chops,
She really
has
does.
the passionate fans. And I really believe, I've listened to her music because I went to my daughter-in-law and I said, so if somebody didn't know anything about her, what would you tell them to do? And she did exactly what I would do when I was teaching somebody to be a Beatles fan. She told me what albums to listen to, in what order, and what songs I should know. And I went and I listened. And you know what? She converted me.
Cool.
So I believe there's room for fandoms to perpetuate, and I believe there's room for new fandoms to be perpetuated.
Scott O'Rourke, who has his radio show at midnight tonight. I think it goes from Kit, is it midnight until 3 or something?
It's something like that. Yeah, I think you're right.
Tonight, and oh my goodness, his knowledge of the Beatles is phenomenal.
Yes.
And I would say he's probably in his 30s.
Yeah, something like that.
He's young.
But then Julia Pritis, I mean,
Yeah.
is in a Beatles tribute band, and we could there is a large group of emerging fans, and that's a whole topic. I know.
Don't you feel sad for people that don't have a fandom, a group that they belong
Sometimes,
to?
Yeah.
Like, I don't care. I'm not particularly a Taylor Swift fan. I don't care one way or the other, but I love that she has this dedicated group of fans that are enjoying her music and trading the bracelets and doing the stuff, because that's so good for them. Like, that's just like, yeah, that's how I feel about it. And I just think there's people that don't have a thing. They don't have a group that they go to.
In that same vein, do you guys ever think about how different your life would be without this?
Yeah.
We wouldn't all know each other, for one thing.
Right.
But
my mom and I were just having that conversation about the experiences that we've had because of the Beatles and the people we met, and how different things would just be.
Yeah. And I
said, well, I would latched onto something else, because that's just how I am. Wasn't the Beatles, I would have found something.
But yeah, me too. But the thing is, I think that what this fandom particularly, and passionate fandoms in general, do is that they bring people together over a shared love for something. It turns into other things because we're all friends on so many levels. We're friends because we know each other from the Beatles. But if that's all we ever talked about, it'd get real old real fast. So we talk about other stuff. We all know each other, and we have plenty of other common threads in our lives. But, I think sometimes about how different my life would be. And I also think, yes, like you, I would have latched onto something else, obviously. But my life would be a lot sadder too, I think,
Yeah.
And I like my life. I like the way it turned out so far. I hope it goes on for a good long time.
Me too.
And but I feel like there's joy here, and anything that gives you that kind of joy. And Beatles people, regardless of age, regardless of gender, regardless of anything, generally Beatles people carry a lot of joy.
Well, that's where the connection comes back in again, because it's through that connection that we not only connect initially through the Beatles, but we also may like the Mets. We also may like this. We may also might have other interests, and so the relationship grows.
Yeah,
and so I think that we've really been very lucky to find something that a great number of people have one common interest that grows into a lot of other things.
And it's nice
And
that we all share the same inside jokes. I mean, I could say he's very clean, and everybody that here knows what I'm talking about. Like,
Yeah.
everyone could chuckle, and like,
Kit
oh,
and I
no,
could
it's
tell
like we're all
stories.
in on the same joke.
Yep.
Kit and I
Yeah.
could tell stories about the in-jokes from every single fest we've ever been to.
Yep. Absolutely.
It's like if you've been to the Chicago Fest and you used to get that newsletter, Go to the Window, that they used to
Yes.
print.
Yeah.
And the funniest thing was the first time I saw Go to the Window, I went to New York for years before I ever set foot in Chicago. And the very first time I laid my hands on one of those, I got every joke.
Yeah.
You know, you didn't have to be a Chicago Fest person to get the joke. You just had to be a Fest person.
Yep.
And I've
Okay,
been going to the Fest
Um,
since 1977.
I have to interrupt because somehow I got popped out of the visual, but I'm
Oh.
gonna have to excuse myself anyway.
Okay, Jan, thank you very much for
Just
being
you,
on
but
on
yeah.
the show.
And
And remember
you.
her book. Give us the title of your book again.
Okay, My Ticket to Ride, How I Ran Away to England to Meet the Beatles and Got Rock and Roll Banned in Cleveland, a true story from 1964. Thank you.
So thank you, Pat.
It's
Thank
good
you,
to
Jan,
see
for
you,
joining us.
Jan.
See you,
And go
Jan.
out and get that book.
It was great being with all of you.
Mhm.
Thanks,
Mwah.
Jan.
Thanks, Ed.
Take care.
Uh,
So we all kind of gonna start to wind up now.
yeah.
I'm going to go through everybody just to kind of give a little bit of where people can reach out to you. If there's a book or something you want to promote, please let us know what that might be. Jude, can I start with you, please?
sure. JohnLennonSeries.com is my website. I would love for you to take a look. You can read a sample chapter from each book. You can listen to a chapter from the utterly magnificent audiobook that Scott R. McKinley did. I can't say enough about Scott McKinley. He makes you feel as if you were actually there in 1963 in the book She Loves You. He's just so good. The books are also available through thefest.com. I am as big a Fest for Beatles fan maniac as I am a Beatles maniac, and it is coming up August the 6th through the 8th. Did I say that correctly, Susan?
I believe so.
At the Hyatt Regency O'Hare in Chicago. If you've never been to a fest, you really are missing the time of your life.
It's
So,
actually August 8th through 10th, Jude.
thank you. Thank you. August 8th through 10th.
Yes.
I need to change that.
I checked that myself.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. 8th through the 10th in Chicago. And I have a podcast called Tell Me Why. It's a short podcast, but it catches you up on things in like 25 to 30 minutes. And thank you for having me on the show. I truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jude. It was great to see you. My audience should know that I met Jude initially at the Fab Fest in North Carolina in 2023. Jude, are you going to go back to North Carolina?
Boy, I would love to be invited to come back to that. That city is the friendliest city on the face of the earth. People
Yeah.
kept saying hello. And I was like, do I know that person?
That was me. Keep running around back to your table. Keep saying hello.
We would go in restaurants and people would say, hey, what did you have to eat when we were coming out? Like, I don't know them. It is the friendliest town. Kit, you went
Yeah.
there. Didn't
Yeah, I went there last year and absolutely great restaurants too, by
That's
the
in
way.
Charlotte, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it
I've
is-
got some Beatles friends in Charlotte. I need to go down there.
It's quite lovely, and I really enjoyed it. So you have to be invited back. Who knows? I probably misbehaved.
You, Jude? Never.
Dude, the wild John Lennon fan.
Yeah.
Sarah, can you give us a little info on where people can find you and stuff like that?
Sure. Go to Meet the Beatles for Real, all one big long word. Why did I have to make it so long.com? You can find information on how to order my book, or you can get it on Amazon. On Amazon, it's hardback, paperback, and an ebook now. So, Dear Beatle People, the story of the Beatles, North American fan clubs. It's the name of the book, and Meet the Beatles for Real is my website.
Thank you, Sarah. fantastic having you here. Susan, could you give us a little blurb?
Sure. So I am the co-author of the Beatles Fab Four Cities, Liverpool, London, Hamburg, and New York, with fellow tour guides from Liverpool and London, David Bedford and Richard Porter. I am a tour guide of Beatles sites in New York City, and I run Fab Four NYC Walking Tours. The website is Fab4 NYC Tours with an S, all one word, .weebly, weebly.com. And you can book a tour with me. I do my tours strictly by appointment. People can contact me through the website, through email. My phone number is on there. You can get a hold of me that way. I also am a longtime staff member at the Fest for Beatles Fans, both New York and Chicago. I am one of the moderators in the discussion room. I do the scheduling for the discussion room. If you come to the fest and you don't ever leave the ballroom, you should, because there's some great discussions going on. And all of these ladies have all been part of it at one time or another. You name it, I do it. I wear a lot of hats.
Sure do.
And it's a lot of fun. And I hope that people will want to contact me. I would love to do another part 2 of this discussion of
Yeah, I think we should.
because
Yeah.
I think this is a fascinating topic, and I have been privileged to be with all 4 of the other women who've been on this panel tonight. Jan is already gone, but Sarah, Kit, Jude, and Jan are all dear friends, and it's always lovely to share some time with them. And also, Ed,
Cool.
lovely to share time with you as you
Always,
are a dear friend.
always, Susan. In fact, I want to do that walking tour. I got to get
we
into
will,
that.
we will have a
Maybe
discussion.
this
Don't
summer
worry.
we'll figure it out.
Yeah, you guys
And,
do it. It's great.
And lastly, our queen.
Well, thank you very much. And this has been an absolute pleasure to see everybody. As I said, I'm honored to be on this distinguished panel. So you can find me at kidotool.com. And you can find me on Facebook. You can check out my books, Songs We're Singing, Guided Tours of the Beatles, Lesser Known Tracks. If you're a Michael Jackson fan, I've also written a book called Michael Jackson FAQ, All That's Left to Know About the King of Pop. And you can find those on Amazon. That's probably the easiest way to do it. And I also co-host 2 video cast/podcast. Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles video cast. In fact, right before coming on here, we just finished recording our next episode, and I think you can guess what's behind me here, what it was about.
That one.
So, you can find us at talkmoretalk.com. I'm also the co-host of the podcast Toppermost of the Poppermost, and you can find that toppermostofthepoppermost.net. You can find all the past episodes on there as well. And as Ed mentioned, I also teach courses through Monmouth University. If you go to my website, you can find more information about that. Last time we did Yacht Rock.
So you're not just the queen, you're the captain, huh?
That's right. I'm the captain. That's right.
Can't have enough titles.
Yep, exactly. So I had to do it. And next time, in the fall, I'm going to be teaching a course on disco, the history of disco.
That's
Going to be a lot of fun. I've been working on it, and it's great. So again,
get our dancing shoes on.
Yeah, get your dancing shoes on, get that mirror ball going. It's going to be great. So you can find out more information about all this stuff on my website. And again, Ed, thank you so much for having me on.
Fantastic.
This has been great.
Thank you very much, ladies, every one of you. This is Ed Rising and Ed's Pop O Matic Podcast. We are on YouTube. We have a YouTube page. We've advanced a YouTube page. And so please check it out. Search the name of the podcast and you'll find up all these videos that we've done the last couple of years. And we're going to be accelerating just a lot more media product in next few months. We're not taking a break. We keep going. We're moving on. And you also can contact me at erising4@aol.com. You can check out me on Facebook. I'm there. A little bit too often, but I'm there. and I thank you for listening to the podcast tonight, and to Jude and to Susan and Sarah and Jan and Kit. And we'll come back to do more podcasts like this in the near future. Have a good night, everyone.